once you learn about Jack Kirby, it kind of, changes the way you see everything.
Lounging, son.
So welcome to the Comic Lounge. Today I got another awesome interview for you guys. I'm interviewing Tom Scioli, who just launched his Kirby book, and I can't think of anybody more perfect to do this book. Thanks for being here, Tom.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. So, since we last talked, I think you were still working on the Kirby book. How does it feel to finally have it out in the world?
Oh, it's great. Yeah, it just, as we're talking, it just came out today. So, yeah it's great, just sort of, seeing everybody saying oh, I got my copy, or, mine's in the mail, or, or people taking pictures of themselves with the book and stuff. So it's, and hearing, people kind of, roll in with their impressions of it and stuff, and getting reviews and things, which have been, real good so far.
Oh my God, it was awesome. I fucking love the book, dude. I couldn't put it down. I was wondering, because it's clear you did a lot of research. How intense was the research for this book?
Yeah, it was, it was sort of constant, and there was a lot up front, and then I had a pretty good grasp of Kirby's life story and kind of the ins and outs of it, but I still there's a lot there, there's a lot of details, and then getting everything straight and getting the chronology of it right, and making sure okay, now did this come before this, and then sometimes there'd be things where it's okay, now did this part really, I kind of remember this happened, did it really play out this way, and then kind of searching around trying to find citations and things to see if okay, yeah, that did happen.
What were some of the more interesting things that you learned while doing the book that maybe you didn't even know before, or maybe some stuff that you knew about but maybe learned a little bit more about that specific thing that you...
Yeah, those years between the time between him coming home from World War II to his return to Marvel, I kind of had a sense of that period of time, but it wasn't crystal clear what happened first, and what things were going on simultaneously, and exactly how all that stuff lined up. So it was kind of clarifying that, because the stuff before the war and during the war, I had a pretty clear grasp of that, and then the stuff of sort of the Marvel years onward had a pretty good grasp, but it was those in between years where it was kind of okay, now okay, which one of these things came first? And then he had some TV pitches and things that he did that didn't go anywhere, and he had comic strips, and so it was kind of a question of okay, where did these things happen in the scheme of things? And then even his return to Marvel, it's he talks about going into Stan Lee's office, and Stan is kind of dejected and stuff, but it's kind of okay, what was happening right before that?
Mm-hmm.
And those little things. So it was figuring that stuff. But I guess in terms of surprises, one that keeps coming to mind for me is Kirby's first superhero that he worked on. I knew about the different superheroes he'd worked on, and if I had to name the first, I think okay, maybe it's the Black Owl or Red Raven, or maybe even Blue Bolt, if you would consider Blue Bolt a superhero. He's kind of like a Flash Gordon kind of character. Right. But the first one he worked on was the Blue Beetle, which surprised me. I knew he had done some Blue Beetle stuff, I just didn't realize that was the very first superhero that mm-hmm. this guy who's known for the American superhero, that was the first one. We don't really think of Jack Kirby and Blue Beetle. If there's an artist we think of in conjunction with Blue Beetle, it's usually Steve Ditko,
right?
But Kirby, that was the first superhero Kirby ever worked on. He didn't create the Blue Beetle. The Blue Beetle predated him, but it was the first one he worked on.
I wanted to also ask, because I thought it was interesting, some of the stuff, because I know you told it from his point of view, You know, like you got this stuff from interviews and you cited all that stuff in the back, but you also had Roz talking at certain parts of the book, and I loved it. What was the decision behind that? Like, what made you think to have her as a little bit of a point of view as well in there?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's just kind of like, you know, I wanted to get some other perspectives in there, you know, and I thought, you know, for like kind of like introducing, like to introduce Roz, like let her come in because she's so much like Jack Kirby's partner.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's got all these sort of creative partners, but like Roz is like the main partner. And then and then of course Stan, like, you know, he's kind of, you know, like that's people who are reading this book are kind of curious about, you know, his relationship with Stan, and are probably like most curious about like those characters and comics that they made together. You know, like, I mean, Kirby has such a long and fruitful career, but you know, you can but like you know, those 1960s Marvel comics that he did with Stan Lee are kind of like, those are the ones that are you know, probably top of most people's list in terms of like, you know, what they would, you know, come to a Jack Kirby book looking for.
Right. I mean, yeah, I while I love those, I definitely, going back, and his DC stuff is just, it's so awesome, dude. And you know, speaking of Stan Lee, you know, he's kind of the villain a little bit, if you could call him that, of the story. You know, if there was a villain, you know, like of the story, at least in my eyes. I don't want to say that you vilified him, but I just saw that as that. And I mean, I've seen a lot of stuff about Kirby, and you know, a lot of people say that he was treated unfairly by Stan, and I think I kind of see it, and I know that these are Kirby's words, you know, on paper, kind of. But did your opinion change, or of Stan at all, hearing some of these stories from Kirby's mouth himself?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like, I mean, you know, this is a story, like the story of Jack Kirby's life is, you know, it's a real thing. So it's like, I don't have the final say on, you know, what any of it means. I just kind of presented it as, you know, as factually as I could. So, I mean, I don't see Stan as the villain, but I see how somebody could, you know, and I think, you know, in working on this, I like some of the like Stan moments are like some of the most fun moments in the book. And he does have a certain like, you know, charisma and charm that I think, it surprised me how well that carried over into this comic. I think his like persona,
oh yeah,
you know, really translates well into comics. I mean, you know, it's kind of like what it was designed for.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, like, I didn't create it with any intent of like, you know, of making Stan seem cool or making him seem like a jerk or whatever. Like, I was just, you know, trying to tell it like it is. And I think, you know, there, like, he has his moments, and but I mean, I like my journey with that relationship, like the Stan and Jack relationship, I think is similar to a lot of people who, you know, learn about Kirby, because I learned about Stan first. You know, I knew who Stan Lee was. He was the narrator of the Spider-Man cartoon and the Hulk cartoon. Like, I knew that persona, and I thought of him as like, oh, he's Mr. Marvel. He's the guy who made all this stuff. I didn't really even think very deeply about, you know, oh, who drew what, or, you know, this was when I was a kid. And then it wasn't until years later that I found out about, you know, Jack Kirby and what his role. And so when I like realized the depth of that, I was kind of like, you know, a little like maybe like wronged or something, where it's like, you know, why wasn't I told about that? You know, how come I was under the impression that Stan Lee did all this stuff, and how come I didn't hear about Jack Kirby? But it's just like, that's just, you know, that's just how it's you know, for various reasons, which are in the book. That's just sort of, you know, that's why that was like sort of the story for so long, was of, you know, Stan Lee being sort of like the sole genius behind Marvel. And so, you know, like, you know, I'd come to terms with that a long time ago, and now I sort of, you know, understand, you know, about sort of politics, office politics, power dynamics, and personalities, and personality quirks, and I sort of like understand how how you could get how we'd arrive at a place where somebody like Jack Kirby, who was at least 50% responsible for these comics and characters, if not more, how he ends up being largely forgotten, except to people who've been paying like really close attention.
Right. Yeah. I'm not saying, I definitely don't think you vilified him. I just think that especially over the last few years, learning some of the stories behind it and how he wasn't recognized, for as much of how he, I've always known as a kid, because I've always paid attention to that stuff. But I think the larger people are like, oh yeah, Stan Lee created it, the large public, so it's sad a little bit, to see him, because he was kind of more reserved, he was the quieter one. Stan was the boisterous, larger than life personality. And I don't know, it a little bit made me feel sad for Jack, that he didn't get maybe as much of the love as he should have got while he was still here.
That plagued him. That really bothered him a lot in his life, that he just saw him getting no credit for these things, and it seemed to him like it was getting worse. He was getting more, and as the years went on, he was getting more and more marginalized and pushed to the sides and forgotten by this sort of corporate myth that was being set into stone, as it was becoming codified, and that these Stan Lee is the the Hans Christian Andersen of superheroes, and so Kirby was aware of it, and it caused him a lot of pain. And it towards the end of his life, he started to see this sort of turn, like when he went to work at Ruby Spears in animation, and all the guys who worked there, all the artists and writers and stuff were like, oh my God, it's Jack Kirby, I can't believe it, so he'd get those kind of reactions, more and more from sort of the fans, and then even towards the very end, there was some early, there was a fanzine called the Jack Kirby Quarterly that Chrissy Harper edited, and it was kind of right before the Jack Kirby Collector, and so he was starting to see these things of okay, maybe I'm not getting one dime from the Secret Wars action figures or whatever, but I'm not going to be forgotten. I think that was a big deal to him, of that he would just there'd be no trace of him left attached to these things that he poured his life into.
You touched on more of when he came to DC, and obviously I was born in '87, so I wasn't around for that, but I thought it was really interesting seeing that he was almost going to curate that line, right? He was trying to get other people to do it, and they just no, you need to write and draw it. And I thought that was really interesting. Was there anything else that you learned? Because I'm a huge DC fan, and I was wondering if there's anything else that you learned about that period that maybe you didn't include in the book that you thought was kind of interesting, or other things that just other things about that time of him trying to curate that line, and maybe why he decided to go back to Marvel. If you could go a little bit deeper into that.
I mean, there's a lot there. It was writing the book. That was one of the big decisions of how how geeky do I get with this stuff? Because there's I mean, you could just go on and on about the minutia, and I am very interested in that minutia. And I included, as much of it as I could, but different people's, tolerance for that kind of stuff varies. It was just he, kind of ran out of options at Marvel. Marvel was being sold to a conglomerate. He had a lot of verbal promises from Martin Goodman about, participation and royalties and things in the characters he created. And, as it got closer to selling to that new company, it was, he wasn't getting any kind of like, those promises seemed to get like more and more sort of forgotten, and then the new owners were like, we don't know anything, like we don't know what you're talking. We know Stan Lee, like who are you, like what's your job here? And just it was just kind of a brick wall. And he said like his disagreements with Stan, and he felt like Stan was going off into like some like very weird ego trip that Kirby wanted no part of. And Kirby said that he felt kind of responsible for having created this quote unquote monster that he saw Stan Lee becoming. And so for that and other reasons, he jumped ship to DC, and he had, towards the end of his time at Marvel, he'd been holding on to like a lot of like ideas he had, because he'd see how he'd introduce these things and then they get sort of taken away from him, like Silver Surfer being like the big example. So he was keeping these things to himself, and so then he like showed them to Carmine Infantino at DC, and it was like the concept drawings of like the New Gods, and Carmine's like, yeah, this stuff's great, come on over. And yeah, it was like, again, it was a lot of like verbal promises. That's a big lesson from Kirby's life, is to kind of like get it in writing, because there'd be all these verbal promises of things, and then he got to DC, and it's like he would pitch all these projects that other people could do, and then they'd be like, okay, well, Jack, how about you work on that? We really like the way you write, we like the way you draw, how about you do that? And so it became apparent that like, okay, this idea of Jack Kirby starting like a West Coast division of DC Comics, wasn't going to happen. Like that, it was just going to be like the things he created and drew and wrote directly. That's all they were interested. They weren't interested in him sort of being like an editor to other creators that he put together. So Dan Spiegel was going to draw Commandy, and Mark Evanier was going to write it, and then it's like, well, no, Jack, how about you write and draw it? Like, did that, and he pitched, like, he had a lot of like concepts for. He felt really strongly that like that comic book format was kind of a dead end, and that they should kind of look into like full color magazines and book length things, and just different formats for presenting this stuff. And DC just wasn't interested in that. They eventually did sort of like cheap versions of it with In the Days of the Mob and Spirit World, where those were supposed to be like full color glossy magazines, and they did them as sort of like Warren publication kind of like black and white things, and they put no promotion behind them. They didn't even put like their name on, like the name of the company on them. It wasn't like DC or National or anything. It was like this. It was like Hampshire Press or something. They came up with some one shot imprint that they put on it.
Like the thing that I wish I could have seen that. I wish I could have seen a West Coast DC Comics with Kirby at the helm.
Yeah, I mean, we have, like DC is a West Coast thing now. Like that just happened a couple of years ago. So they could have started it decades earlier, and helmed by Jack Kirby. How awesome would that be?
Oh my God, I can't even imagine it. And it's just such a shame that they were so like they couldn't even see what could have come from something like that. They were like, I just don't get it. It blows my mind. Like I had no idea. I knew that he left, Marvel for DC. Didn't know that was the extent of it, like what he was promised, and fucking shame on DC, like for real. Like I just can't imagine, like if like nowadays, right? Editors now must have been like, you guys are fucking nuts for not doing that.
It had to be pretty frustrating for Kirby, because he was so like forward looking. Like he saw further than anybody. He had all these like ideas that were like, decades ahead of anybody else. And then dealing with like a editorial structure like DC, where they were like really like behind the times and very like like super resistant to change, almost like to a spiteful degree, like that, like
Yeah.
Yeah, it had to be super frustrating for him. And then also, like, he'd question his own instincts sometimes. Was like, okay, maybe everybody else is right. Maybe, maybe what, like it's a shame when somebody's like so right on, and then sort of like the people around them make, kind of hit him with so much, negativity that he kind of starts to doubt his own, like his own vision. But I mean, it's not an uncommon story in like in that respect, that like a lot of times, there's just a ton of resistance when somebody has like the right idea about something.
I thought that was interesting. Like when Jeanette Kahn kind of came in and tried to like let him finish it off, and still like they still had to have their hands in it. Like that's just something that I find more and more now with like Marvel and DC, that just like it frustrates me, because like it's so clear when certain things are editorial, and corporate, especially, you have Disney owning Marvel, you have AT&T owning DC, and like they don't like to push the boundaries too much. There's always the pullback. I feel like that's a beautiful thing about creator-owned stuff, and it's why I personally I gravitate more and more towards it, because I like the freedom, I feel more of an emotional connection to that stuff, than some of the stuff that Marvel and DC put out. I did want to ask you though, what was the main message that you wanted to deliver?
The whole point of this book, is kind of like, hey, there's this guy named Jack Kirby. Most of the pop culture, most of the when you go to the movies, most of those things that you see, like this is the guy that created them or co-created them. All that Marvel stuff, the stuff that's been like every hit movie for the past like, almost 20 years. It's this guy, and you got to know about him. Like he basically engineered, popular culture as we know it, and then his influence extends beyond the things that he directly created or co-created, and into the things he influenced, which can arguably include Star Wars and all sorts of things. So it's just like you got to know about this guy Jack Kirby. And once you learn about Jack Kirby, it kind of changes the way you see everything. You sort of just see his hand everywhere, and his worldview, and things start to make a lot more sense. When you get a sense of like the actual people that were involved in creating these things.
Mm-hmm. And now I wanted to ask you some Kirby questions, like on a personal.
Yeah, sure.
What are your favorite creations of Kirby's, if you had to pick like your top 3, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, my top 3 would be, New Gods, Mr. Miracle, and Forever People. Those are my top 3. Like, I love that his DC era. I love the Fourth World stuff. If I had to pick like one issue, it would be New Gods number 7. That's like the one where it's like just super, like everything I want from Kirby is there. Sort of like the cosmic, the mythic, the emotion, the tragedy. Like it's all there in that one issue. But yeah, that's my top stuff. And then of course I love all of it, all his stuff to differing degrees. And there's like really strong stuff. Like there's individual issues of like Fantastic Four or Thor or whatever that are up there with the DC stuff as far as I'm concerned. But like the DC stuff just as like a body of work is so strong and cohesive and really like unlike anything else. Like it's still ahead of the curve even today. Like pop culture hasn't really like caught up to that stuff quite yet.
And I know that I heard you say something about the Fourth World, the way they're collecting it. what
Yeah,
is
sure.
what is your, what way do you think it should be collected? What's the best way to read the Fourth World for somebody that's never read it before? That way they can get the best experience possible.
The top way is to sort of read the individual titles, New Gods, Mr. Miracle, and the Forever People. Just sort of, read them sort of separately as a unit alongside each other. Reread them. The thing you're alluding to is like they collected all of them together in this sort of Fourth World omnibus a bunch of years ago, and they put them in order of publication, which I think was a pretty good idea. That's an interesting way to present them because, an issue of this would come out, you'd read it, and you'd maybe learn about like the Mother Box, and then, an issue of New Gods would come out, and you'd find out some more about the Mother Box, and then an issue of Mr. Miracle would come out, and, it would sort of, it was like an interesting way to go about it, and you're reading them kind of close to the way that Jack produced them. But the big like blunder, I thought, was the inclusion of Jimmy Olsen. Like the inclusion of Jimmy Olsen, like the Jimmy Olsen stuff is it's just not, it's not as of a piece as the rest of it. Like Jimmy Olsen works really well as sort of like its own thing that kind of like guest stars Kirby's Fourth World, but I don't see it as central. And it's also like, it's just like, I think it's inferior work compared to the rest of it. So when you would get these newer reprintings that they're doing the same thing. They're including the Jimmy Olsen. And so when you read it, your first impression of like Jack Kirby's masterwork, the Fourth World, your first impression are like a bunch of like Jimmy Olsen stories. And it's like not the best foot forward. It's kind of like, okay, what the Newsboy Legion, what is all this stuff? Whereas if you kind of take Jimmy Olsen out of the equation and just keep it as its own separate thing, your first impression would be, either Forever People #1, which was the first Fourth World comic that Jack Kirby drew. Jimmy Olsen came out before Forever People #1, but Kirby created Forever People #1 before he created the Jimmy Olsen stuff. So, if you went in the order that Jack Kirby actually created them, as opposed to the order in which they came out, you'd get, Forever People #1, and then you get New Gods #1, and then you get Mr. Miracle #1, and it would sort of cycle that way. And it presents the story in a much better way. You get, sort of Darkseid comes to Earth. He's broken the treaties. He's come to Earth, and the Forever People are there to stop him. And Superman gets mixed up in it. It's just like a really great intro. Or you conversely, you could just maybe swap it with New Gods #1, because New Gods #1 feels like it's the intro to the Fourth World. It's kind of like the old gods died, and then there were the new gods. It kind of it starts earlier than any of this other stuff. So either one of those like works, but that first Jack Kirby Jimmy Olsen, it's an odd comic. The whole Jimmy Olsen series, like I've grown to like it, over time, but it took me a long, like I'm a huge Jack Kirby fan, and it took me a long time to get on board with Jimmy Olsen. It's got all these like weird, like redrawn Superman and Jimmy Olsen faces. And again, it's like, it gets a lot of credit because it's technically the first appearance. This is real minutia, by the way. Talking about minutia, this is the kind of geeky stuff that I didn't do. I tried not to do too much of in the book. It's technically the first appearance of Darkseid because in the final panel of Jack's first Jimmy Olsen comic, the final panel is this tiny little picture of Darkseid's face on a view screen. It's not even like an inch tall, and he's also colored incorrectly. His face isn't gray; it's like skin tone color, and so it's like, oh well, this is Darkseid's first appearance, but it's like, come on, like it hit the stands before, but like Darkseid makes a much grander, much better appearance in Forever People #1, which Jack drew first, and you really get to meet Darkseid. It's kind of like there's the Wolverine thing where it's like, okay, this is where Wolverine's first appearance, and it's like the last page of the issue. Now at least that Wolverine first appearance is kind of like a cool shot of Wolverine, coming in, and so where this is like just, basically like this much of Darkseid.
Yeah.
Again, I could go on about this, like, but it just reads so much better, and I don't think Jack thought of Jimmy Olsen as like an essential part of his thing. It's like, okay, I'm taking on this assignment of Jimmy Olsen, but I came to DC with these concepts. I came to DC with the idea for New Gods. I came with the idea of Forever People. I came with the idea of Mr. Miracle. This is the story I came here to tell. And then once I got here, they were like, oh yeah, we got this comic that currently doesn't have a creative team assigned to it. So would you like to do it? And he's like, oh yeah, sure. I can load that up with my stuff, but it wasn't essential to Kirby. I don't think it's essential, to the Fourth World. And I think it makes the Fourth World like a less enjoyable experience and harder for me to recommend, because that's a question I would always get of like, oh, what's your favorite comic? What's your favorite Jack Kirby comic? I want to check it out. And people would usually ask in terms of like graphic novels, like, especially like people who aren't like super versed in comics kind of are like, oh yeah, graphic novels. What's a cool graphic novel for? And it's like, I couldn't recommend that because it's like they get 2 pages in and be like, what the fuck are you thinking? It's like our gang in a garage, souping up a hot rod. Like, what is this stuff? I don't get it. What you said this is your favorite comic? It's like, no, that's not my favorite. Read 60 pages of that garbage, and then you'll get to my favorite comic.
I'm definitely glad they started collecting them individually in these new trades.
Yeah.
It definitely makes it easier to read, and that way, like you said, I would rather read them in chunks of the series than read them chronologically the way they came out. So
yeah, and that's why, like, it's kind of frustrating as a Kirby fan because they've only just come out. Like, for all the years of this stuff, they never collected it as in color as here's the New God. Jack Kirby created a thing called the New Gods. Here's the New Gods in full color. Like, it's only very recently that they did that, and that's kind of shocking to me. Like, they came out with like these black and white collections of like New Gods, Forever People, and Mr. Miracle, back in the 90s. But it's like, no, that's that doesn't do the trick. And this like amalgamated version is cool, but it's like, give us the things first, but here they are. They're finally and Forever People is supposed to come out soon. So once that comes out, it's like, okay, all's forgiven.
And then so just to cap off, this is your first nonfiction book, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you was the experience something that you'd like to maybe do again? Is there any other creators that you'd like to do, or maybe any other people that you admire that maybe aren't even comic book people that you'd like to tell the story of?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a really good experience, and I would like to do that again. Like, I would like to, maybe not necessarily like an individual, but I'd like to tell some stories about real actual things that happen in the world, and there's a ton of creators. Jack, it's hard to follow Jack. It's like just like in terms of like his impact is so huge. Like where do you go after that? But then also just for me personally, there's not another creator I feel as connected to, like as like a fan and as like an inspiration. But it's definitely something I'd want to do. I mean, I got into comics to do the kind of like escapism, fantasy, science fiction, larger than life, like the sort of stories that Jack Kirby does. That's what I got into this for. So that I still like feel the pull back to that stuff and to do more of that stuff. But the nonfiction stuff, it's it's just really compelling, and I am able to get in like a lot of the the kind of stuff that I'm into, even within like the limitations of the nonfiction frame.
Is there anything else that you're working on, or are you kind of taking a break now? Now that you finished
Yeah, I mean,
this,
like it seems like the world's taking a break. Like I have a lot of like things I'm kind of playing with, but I don't have a thing where I'm like, okay, this is it. This is what I'm working on now. This, that's always just kind of been my process. I just kind of, play around with things and see if things gel. And then every now and then like something, drops in my lap, like, Fantastic Four grand design or where like somebody comes to me and says, hey, do you want to do this? But, for the most part, it's just kind of like, just playing around with ideas and seeing if any of them grow into anything. So I'm kind of in that phase right now, and it's fun. It's limitless, but it's also it's a little frustrating too, because I'm kind of waiting for inspiration to arrive and waiting for something to get some like momentum where I'm like, yeah, forget everything else. This is what I'm working on now. And this is what I'm going to work on for the next year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. And I've just, I'm just not there yet. Like, this took a lot out of me. Like, I've been working on this for years, working like, pretty nonstop. And by the time I finished it, I was like exhausted. I needed to recharge. I needed some time off, and I took some time off. And then just as I was kind of ready to get back into things, then, COVID-19 hit and all this stuff, and so it's just like this weird, twilight zone that we're all in together at the moment. And I see a lot of people kind of feeling similarly of like, kind of like, yeah, like I have a lot of time on my hands and technically I should be like more productive than ever, but I don't like, just not feeling it, it's like I'm not the kind of person who kind of like if I'm not feeling inspired, I'm not going to just like sit, in the corner in the dark and like wait for inspiration to arrive. I'll work on, like, even if I'm not feeling it, I'll work on stuff and try and put stuff together. But like when something does like really, when you feel that like lightning bolt, hit you, it's like, that's like the best feeling in the world. And like, I'm waiting for that to arrive.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not too much longer.
Yeah, hopefully not, man. I'm looking forward to your next project. And then, I want to ask one more question before we get out of here. What is there any books that you're reading currently that you're excited about? And maybe any creators that you're following, maybe that aren't somebody that any of the listeners or myself are familiar with, that maybe you want to give a little.
I'm like looking around the room, just looking at it like, yeah, what have I been reading? A lot of old comics, a lot of Kirby. Like I've been getting, because after I finished this, I was kind of like Kirby'd out. Like I was so immersed in Kirby, like morning, noon, and night. And so now I'm kind of back to like, reading Kirby for pleasure. So I was like reading the Thor treasuries that Kirby did, where like one of them's like the Hercules story, this story where he kind of like fights with Hercules, and then there's like the Mangog one where like Ragnarok is approaching. So I've been reading those. Been reading like some old John Buscema Cull the Conqueror comics and kind of getting into those, and some Frank Thorne Red Sonja comics. Like I'm a big fan of like the barbarian genre and like those Frank Thorne comic. Like he's just got such a great style, such a light touch, and Red Sonja is kind of like a cool character, and like his approach is different. It's almost like old school comic strips or something. Let's get the names mixed up. Some of these like old Captain Americas, Grunwald and Neary Captain Americas from kind of like the mid 80s. Mm-hmm. Those are always fun. Like just I guess because of like 4th of July and stuff, I was like reading a bunch of Captain America stuff. Some of the Kirby stuff. Just talking about like the New Gods in the Fourth World. I recently bought. They collected Walt Simonson's Orion.
Oh yeah,
he's super cool. Like just and a really great companion piece to what Kirby did with it. You know, really, like, and also a companion piece to, like, the same way that Thor is a companion piece to the New Gods in the Fourth World. Walt Simonson's Thor is like a companion piece to his Orion. Like, it's really interesting to sort of, you know, compare and contrast Simonson's Thor and Orion, and then to contrast, you know, Simonson's Orion and Kirby's Fourth World stuff. It's you know, really good stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never thought about, you know, connecting that. You know, how they both had like long runs on both of those respective characters, kind of, you know. It's interesting.
Yeah, and it is like it's analogous because, like, you know, Kirby's Thor was a much longer run, and Simonson's Thor was a much longer run, and they're both like these really like beautiful masterworks that have like so many little twists and turns and like all kinds of great stuff. And then you have the New God stuff where it's like very short by comparison, but very intense, like extremely focused, and like really like has like a hard punch. So it's, you know, it's pretty cool. I'm looking at I think Firepower. It was the comic Robert Kirkman and Chris Samney did recently.
Yeah, did you read it?
Oh yeah, and I loved it. Like,
I loved that book. That book was awesome, dude.
Yeah, and it was a cool way to present it too. Have this sort of, you know, kick it off with the graphic novel, have like a free comic book day, that, you know, like, it accomplished what they set out to accomplish. Like, I'm on board with it. It's good stuff.
Yeah. And then so yeah, I wanted just to thank you again for doing this. If you want to throw out any plugs for where people can find you on social media and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, as far as plugs, it's like, you know, Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, on sale now, wherever, you know, comics are sold, or books. And for me personally, it's like, yeah, there's my Twitter at Tom Scioli, and then Instagram at Tom_Scioli. So that's where you can find me. And like, just talking about you know, the kind of stuff I've been working on lately, a lot of these little, you know, experiments and like little things I've been, you know, playing around with comics wise. That's where you'll see it. Like, I've been posting like, you know, oh, here's, you know, some crazy, you know, superhero I came up with, you know, what do you think of this? You know, like, been putting stuff out there. And then also like been putting up a lot of abandoned comics, like stuff, cutting room floor stuff from Transformers versus G.I. Joe, cutting room floor stuff from Superpowers, you know, stuff that's like in my sketchbook, or stuff that didn't quite fit in the comic, and then I just like, you know, draw them up, you know, kind of fast, color them real fast, and just kind of, you know, make these like little like quickie comics. So you'll find all that stuff there.
All right, cool. All right, man. Well, once again, thank you, and let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, for sure. It was good talking to you, Ryan.
Awesome. You too.